Andrew, thanks very much for reading that, and Happy New Year, everyone here. Can I ask you, as we start, what is the difference between a church and the England rugby scrum? Answer, everything. It's not a joke, it's just the truth, isn't it? On the card you've been given advertising the series, there's some of the kind of words people use when they think about a church. In most people's minds, churches are small and weak, divided and pointless. Whereas with 8 months now to go until England play Tonga in Japan, we hope that they are on the protein shakes and the weightlifting, and that we'll end up with the 1-ton scrum finally, strong and united and driving remorselessly to their goal. See, I wonder what your colleagues think that you have come out to this lunchtime. If you said to them you'd come to a church service, I wonder what they thought you were coming to. It always makes me think of getting your car serviced. So as if you looked at your spiritual dashboard of your life over the new year and a couple of the orange warning lights had come on, better go to St. Helens on Tuesday and get a service. Well, with the remarkable letter to the Philippians open, let me give you some different images of why you might be here. You've come to the tank factory. How about that? According to the Daily Mail, we no longer build tanks in the UK, and any new tanks will have German guns. That's the world has ended for the Daily Mail. But they're wrong, because we build tanks here, lunchtime by lunchtime, and Sunday by Sunday. Or a different image again. This is rugby training with the scrum machine. Or different again. This is like getting together the 600 plus partners from KPMG UK all together in one room. I don't know what that would cost in billable time, but imagine that's what we're doing. I wonder if your colleagues would look at you differently if they knew that that was what you had left the desk for today. Look down at page 1180 that Andrew read, and let me show you the tank and the scrum. We read from chapter 1, verse 27 on the left-hand side there. So this is a letter to the city that Philip of Macedon named after himself. This is the guy whose son Alexander conquered the world. And when Paul wants them to understand the point of church, he goes for a locally coherent metaphor. So chapter 1, verse 27, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. That's just a way of saying, do this one thing for me, would you? So that whether I come and see you or am absent, Paul, when he writes, he's waiting to hear whether he's going to be executed or not. And he needs to know that this church will do the business, whether he makes it there or not. That I may hear of you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. Now, I was never really built for rugby, but I did spend a lot of my time waiting in A&E for my brother to come out after kind of arguments he'd had with his opposite number as a prop. And it's all here, isn't it? Stand firm in one spirit, striving side by side. Isn't that the point of all that messy physical contact and the shoes with the pointy bits on? Stand together, unite. Don't be afraid. I was going to say don't be afraid of the fat, hairy Welshman, but I heard an accent on the tape. Don't be afraid of the fat, hairy Frenchman, and push that way. That's the point of a scrum. Well, they didn't have rugby in Philippi, but they did have this thing called the shield wall, a state-of-the-art military formation, the equivalent of a tank. And you put that together with some nifty cavalry, and Alexander leaves Philippi one day, and he ends up in India, having conquered the world on his way. And how a shield wall works is we each show up with a shield and a spear, and you stand side by side with me and put your shield like this, and I stand side by side with you and put my shield like this, and we each stick the spears out the front, and we go that way, not frightened in anything by our opponents. So for Paul, what's the point of Christians? It is to bond together like the pieces of a tank and push ahead for the faith of the gospel. So, what's the point of a church meeting? Why have you come today? Why would you come to a Bible study tomorrow morning before 8 o'clock? Well, to be trained or assembled as a gospel tank so that you can stand firm together and strive for the gospel everywhere that your life takes you in the city. And if you're here from a carol service, something like that, and you're curious about what Christians get up to, I bet you didn't expect this. I wonder if you came to see where Joy from accounts or Dave from HR gets their sort of glowing inner peace from. Well, you might be surprised. Not that Paul uses his warlike metaphor to encourage Christians to be violent. No, not at all. The striving, it is all about speaking the gospel message of forgiveness in Jesus Christ to everyone. And as he writes, Paul, far from being a violent man, he is submitting to arrest and prison and possibly a death penalty because he will do anything to speak about Jesus. And you cannot frighten him. So what's the difference? What's the difference between my Christian life and the England rugby scrum? Will answer everything. And that is not a joke, that is a tragedy. Most of us, I think, are a long way from unafraid striving for the faith of the gospel. Most of us are a long way from boldly speaking, no matter who wants us to shut up. Which is why we need this letter that we're in January and February. Come to the tank factory week by week. Come to scrum training. And I've got 15 minutes now just to put some flesh on the skeleton outline on the sheets you were given when you came in. So first here, he says that Christians are citizens. Christians are citizens. And the translation we've got here, it has struggled to turn everything that Paul says into English for us, but there's a footnote that tells you what you're missing. So if you look down at footnote 1, in verse 27, Paul actually writes, only behave as citizens worthy of the gospel of Christ. And citizenship is a big deal in London at the moment. The Evening Standard last night told me I only need €2 million and I and my family can become Cypriot. Don't know if you saw that. And I know that that's a big deal because I get to sign all the passport application forms, don't I? I'm a responsible profession, and I know that a number of you are dusting down the Irish granny, and I don't think it's because you want to play football for Ireland. Well, citizenship was everything to Paul's first readers. Ancient Greece was not a country. It was a collection of city-states, Athens and Sparta and Philippi. And more than that, by the time Paul was writing, if you were a Roman citizen, then life changed for you. Different rights, different justice, different opportunities, different responsibilities. And Philippi, the strange thing about Philippi was that it was a city where everybody was born a Roman citizen. Greek accent, but imperial passport. That was the unique thing about Philippi. And Paul wants them, even them, to see they have something better than that. They are citizens of a city that will be the capital city of the universe for eternity. Look across the page to 3 verse 20. 3 verse 20, where he begins summing up the chapters we're going to look at in the next 2 months, says 3 verse 20, but our citizenship is in heaven. You and I, we work in the city of London, but we are citizens of heaven. And in a Greek city-state, only the citizens got to vote, and all the citizens had to fight. The two things went together. And as a city, they were all in it together in the project of the city, which is where the KPMG partners meeting comes in as an illustration for us today. I've put on the sheet a discussion question that you might want to look at over your coffee and your sandwiches afterwards. I've put, are you surviving, supporting, or soldiering? And I mean, which one describes your Christian life in the city best, if you're a Christian and a believer in Jesus today? Surviving, supporting, or soldiering? And may I say that all of us go in and out of times in our lives when surviving is all that we are capable of. And for many people, coming week by week here to hear the Bible is a lot like the weekly trip to the hospital to get the kidneys working again and keep us barely surviving under the pressures of life. I'm not asking us to start the series by all pretending to be, 19 stone prop forwards. But there is still a difference between a civilian hospital and a field hospital behind the front line. Both of them want to get you out of your hospital bed as soon as possible, don't they? And in the NHS, that's to hit the target and open up the bed for someone else. But in the field hospital, they want you out of bed so that you can rejoin your unit and go on fighting. Is your goal for the Christian life, the worthy Christian life, to be surviving, supporting, or soldiering? See, in the Christian life, there are no support staff. There are only partners. So a wonderful thing about being a Christian, no one is more important than anyone else. No one has a better passport. We are all citizens of the city in heaven. We all serve Jesus Christ if we follow him. But there is a deep breath to be taken that goes with that. If we're all as important as each other, if we're all citizens, then there are no support staff, there are only partners. And the goal of the Christian life in the city is not to survive, though sometimes the field hospital needs to work flat out just to get there. The goal of being a Christian in the city is not to support gospel work either. Whether you're thinking of the church youth group back where you live that you help out on a Friday night, or whether you're thinking of the work that Wes and his team do here, the goal of the Christian life is to be a partner in gospel work. Please do read the whole letter over the course of the next couple of months. William is only allowing us to look at the core middle section, but the word partner runs all the way through it. Just turn back to one of them, 1 verse 5. Chapter 1 verse 5, the really good thing that Paul gives thanks to God for about this church is because of your partnership in the gospel from first day until now. And he means all of them from the first moment they believed in Jesus. Every Christian a citizen, every Christian a soldier, every Christian a partner. Which means, second, that we will live the only worthy life, which means unafraid striving. You see, you don't build tanks so that children can have rides on them at the county show. You don't build Christians so they can be everyone's friend and take life easy. We are in a war with death. There are over 300,000 people outside that door from Monday to Friday, and it is only urgent to help the ones who will die one day. Those are the only ones we should be worried about, of the 300,000 out there. Again, if you're here with a colleague next to you who thought maybe you come here each week to get an MOT, actually you're here to help everybody in your office or your place of work, everyone to save their lives. That's the aim. It's not a small aim, it's not a messing around aim. It is an important aim. And Paul doesn't know if he will ever see the Philippians again. Come back to 1:27, whether I come and see you or am absent, whether or not he's going to make it back. I know the work of saving people's lives in Philippi is going to be okay because you are there, he says. And I know that every one of you is living the worthy citizen life. Every one of you a partner and a citizen in the project of telling people about Jesus. And William is away at a conference. I'm not aware of any particular reason why he won't be back soon. I'm not expecting a letter like this from the South Coast. But we don't need him. Or more precisely, we only need him to build the tank and repair the tank. William is the boss here. William isn't the gospel worker for the City of London. That's not his job. It's your job, our job. Every Christian is the gospel worker together for the City of London. But you only get in the tank, don't you, if you're expecting it to be tough. And Paul tells them what they already know from experience, and you know from experience. If you put your neck out and strive for the gospel, if you speak up for the message of Jesus without being afraid of what people might think, then there can be opposition. And he wouldn't need to say that in verse 28 unless they were likely to be frightened by the opponents. And when he goes on, verse 29, verse 30, to talk about Christmas presents from God to us for the sake of Christ, he tells us God gives us the one that we all want and the one that we all don't want. Verse 29, for it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, that's present number one, thank you, that is just what I always wanted, I am safe from eternal death. I have the same passport as the eternal Son of God. I will live in his city forever. Thank you. That is a good Christmas present, isn't it? Present one, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. I wonder if that could be the biggest issue for us in 2019. Surviving, supporting, or soldiering. See, a partner thinks of the work, the whole work, as his or her work, because the business belongs to them. That's how it works. And what belongs to them is both the upside and the downside. It's theirs, if you're a partner, both things together. And the same here. You've been granted to be Jesus' citizen soldier, and so you get the conflict, the opposition, the joys, and the battles that go with that. So what do we need? It sounds difficult. It is difficult, isn't it, to do that? What do we need William to come back and do from the rest of Philippians? Well, that's the third point. Citizens who need to stand firm and stand together. I think already, just in these couple of verses, we've seen what every working shield wall needs. What every World Cup winning scrum needs, what every tank needs, what every partnership needs. The first need is to stand firm. Should be obvious, shouldn't it, how important that is in a shield wall. The opposite of stand firm here is the word in verse 28 for frightened. And that is not a word that means a little bit scared, uncomfortable. It's a word that is important to anybody who's ever ridden a horse. It's used for the terrified horse that completely loses its head and bolts for the distance. The eyes glaze up and roll backwards, the ears go flat, and it takes you where you don't want to go. You can imagine what damage it would do the shield wall if one of the soldiers next to you bolted like that horse. Every shield overlapping the one next to them, and then call him Brutus. Brutus panics. And her arms flailing and her eyes rolling. And he drops his shield and he bolts away through the lines, knocking all his mates out of the way as he goes. And that is not going to go well. And in Philippians, this is about standing firm on the gospel and not being scared off it. Not being scared off by people who threaten to harm you if you keep talking about it. And not being pulled off it by people who say that there's something wrong with the gospel and there's something better to be had somewhere else. And that is what chapter 3 is all about. We'll get there in February. Look at 3 verse 1. He writes the same things because it will be safe for you. How the verse ends. And he writes verse 2, a warning, look out for the dogs. And in verse 16, halfway through, he's telling them to hold true to what we have attained. You can hear the captain in the middle of the shield wall, can't you? As the armoured elephant comes closer from India. Hold true. Don't bolt. Don't be frightened. And the chapter ends 4 verse 1, stand firm thus in the Lord. That's what we're going to spend 3 weeks on in February, training us in how to stand firm. And the second need is unity, how to strive with one mind, how to stand together. Again, you can imagine how much less effective the shield wall would be if everybody tried to do their own thing. Half of them want to go that way, the other half want to go that way. Some of them want to go and attack people, some of them want to run away. Or imagine even if they started bickering among themselves. Can't imagine that in a shield wall, but I guess you don't have to imagine it in a church. Quintus always gets to stand in the front. I want to stand in the front today. My shield's heavier than his. I don't want to fight like this anymore. There's no glory for me in standing with everybody else. No one's going to remember my name. I want to go and fight out there on my own. Let me out. I'll be fine. I'll show them. And imagine if they stopped concentrating on the enemies at all and started using the swords on each other. And that is what chapter 2 is about. And that's where we will pick up next week. Just look at 2 verse 2. Complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Wouldn't it be good if every Christian in your office, every Christian in this room, in 5 weeks' time, left this building with the same mind, indestructibly united? Well, Paul thinks he can produce what we need in this letter. He thinks he can build us into a gospel tank here Tuesday by Tuesday, which means, of course, he is going to go after our minds. In case you're confused, there are no protein shakes concealed here in the letters. There's no personality changes either. I'm not going to turn into someone with the build of my brother. But Paul will help each of us, as the person that we are, to become a gospel team together as a Christian, as in the city, without fear, saving lives, and offering forgiveness. Don't we need help in 2019 to be unafraid and united, to think like Jesus Christ until we see him on the day we meet him in our real home in that city? Let me lead us in a prayer before we head round tables to look at those questions. Our Father, we thank you for people like Paul who were unafraid and who brought us the gospel that gives us forgiveness and eternal life. And we ask that his letter, week by week here, would build us into the kind of team you would have us be, to share that gospel with all who we know here in the city. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.